Wednesday. Thank you all for joining me for my weekly series where I share with you all raw and authentic wisdom for you all to be able to implement your boundaries. Today, we are going to be discussing one of my favorite topics, and that is the role of communication in establishing clear boundaries. Let's get started. Oftentimes, I have friends or clients share with me their frustration in not getting their needs met. And one of the questions that I often ask them is, did you communicate your expectations? And what do you all think the most common response to that is? You got it. They did not. And I respond to them, the surest way to get your needs met is to communicate them. I will be sharing with you the role of communication in establishing clear boundaries. For starters, it sets the precedent. Communication is crucial in getting your needs met and being able to establish your boundaries. For starters, clarifying your expectations helps an individual express their expectations, and it not only helps you express the expectations, it helps you understand other people's expectations. So I will share with you a funny story. I have been with my husband for 6 years now. And when we first started dating, he was not the best planner. And it took me about 2 to 3 years for me to be frustrated of him not planning dates, not planning birthdays, not planning gifts until I finally had it. I remember year after year, for the first couple of years, I expected him to know what I wanted. And that was not the case. He was not a mind reader. Therefore, I had to share my disappointment of him not planning birthdays, not buying gifts, not planning dates until he finally was able to. Now, you are probably asking, what does that have to do with boundaries? I am sharing the importance of communication. What role does communication play in establishing clear boundaries? It's crucial. If you don't communicate your expectations, it will be difficult for people to honor your boundaries, therefore causing frustrations. Oftentimes, we have these expectations of others without communicating them, which then can lead to built up resentment. Secondly, the role of communication in establishing clear boundaries is consent and agreement. Again, your needs will not be met unless you communicate them. And you also can't expect for someone to meet your expectations or honor your boundaries if they never agreed to them. We can wish and want someone to honor our boundaries, but if we never communicate them, it's not going to happen. Much less if we don't effectively communicate with them and have their buy-in into them agreeing and consenting to honoring our boundaries. Someone has to consent and agree to honoring your boundary. Therefore, communication allows for an individual to agree to your boundary or not. So, again, story time. I dislike washing. When my husband and I got married, I made it very clear that, and I communicated that I was willing to do dinner, I was willing to do all the other chores, but I was not willing to wash. So I communicated that to my husband very early on of my expectation that I would not be washing. I listed all the things that I was in agreement and what I was not open to. And I asked him, was he open to washing? He consented and he agreed. And that may not be the best example, but that shows you all that only because you communicate an expectation does not mean that it's going to be met. You have to learn to be able to effectively communicate and have the buy-in of the other person. And that is completely up to you whether you want to have it negotiable or non-negotiable. But that's another lesson for another day. The third role that communication plays in establishing clear boundaries is conflict resolution. When boundaries are crossed, violated, or not honored, being able to communicate that helps you resolve that conflict. Because if someone does not honor your boundary, they violate your boundary, they disrespect you, and you don't communicate it, it will not change. Remember, we teach people how to treat us. So if we continue to allow someone to disrespect us, to violate us, to not honor our boundaries, then guess what? We're teaching that person that our boundaries are not really important, that they don't really matter, and that we're just talking, that we don't really plan to enforce what we are saying. Therefore, being able to communicate that can effectively resolve the conflict. It helps one express your concern. It helps you come to a mutual acceptable solution, and it helps you understand the perspective of others. And lastly, the role of communication in establishing clear boundaries is it empowers you. Because how amazing does it feel when you are in integrity with your words? When you say that you're going to do something and you actually do it. When you implement your boundary and you enforce the boundary, that's when you feel powerful. I remember the first time that I pushed back and did not allow for someone to disrespect one of my boundaries. I felt powerful. I felt untouched. And it opened the door for me to be able to implement, establish, and enforce my other boundaries. And now when someone doesn't honor my boundaries, I have no problem communicating. So I will share with you all something that recently happened. I have a friend of mine who I have known for a few years now, and I had communicated an expectation from them, and they didn't honor it. So as uncomfortable as it was for me to call them out on it, I let them know, hey friend, I'm a little disappointed with you. And they asked, well, why? And I said, because when I communicated this expectation, you agreed to it and you didn't honor it. And sometimes it's not purposely done. Sometimes it is. But we were able to resolve that conflict early on without me holding resentment, without it affecting our relationship. And she honored what we initially agreed on And then our relationship is now fine. Or nothing even happened. Our relationship continues. And that is why communication is so important in establishing your boundaries. So let's recap. The four roles of communication in establishing clear boundaries is one, it clarifies the expectation. Two, you are able to establish consent and agreement. Three, it allows you to be able to resolve any conflict. And four, it empowers you. I hope you found this helpful. If you did, please share with someone. Also, make sure to subscribe and turn those notifications on. See you all next week.